Hello, I'm Scott Hammond from INSEAD Knowledge, and it's my pleasure to welcome today Professor Luc van Wassenhove, the Director of the Social Innovation Center at INSEAD. Luc and his colleague on the INSEAD faculty, Margaret Hansen, have just published a new case study called Global Impact, Managing Corporate Giving. One of the things that's intriguing in the article is it talks about old-fashioned philanthropy and then many of the ways in which old-fashioned philanthropy has changed, and it's not the same anymore. What is old-fashioned philanthropy?
I guess in this particular case, this was philanthropy that went through employee giving programs, and largely in public sector in the US. So employees who would work for the Department of Defense would be encouraged to give part of their salary or donations to charities. And that would then maybe be topped up by the organization. And so that would go to a number of charities. And I guess Global Impact, or in its former name, was just collecting that and giving it to a set of member charities. Old-fashioned because there was no tracking, tracing, you didn't really know where the money was going, it wasn't very proactive, and it was doomed to disappear. Doomed to disappear for several reasons, I think, or at least to decrease substantially. The first reason being that with the Reagan administration, there were just a lot less public servants. And there was also some fatigue in giving, right? So the money was drying up, and at the same time, the need for money in the humanitarian world was increasing. Now, most of the money originally was just given to the US for charitable activities in the US. Now, with, I guess, in the 90s, and especially since the new millennium, there's a lot more attention for international crises, international calamities, disasters, and so on. So that was one thing. Bigger need for funds, more globalization, and at the same time funds drying up with the classical old-fashioned channels.
And more involvement now than with the private sector.
So what comes as a natural tendency is that if you can't get the money from the public sector, where are you going to get it from? So you turn to the private sector, and you understand as like an organization, NGO like Global Impact, that you will have to solicit the private sector more. Now, that was a good opportunity because at the same time, there's this whole movement of corporate social responsibility and private companies looking for ways of helping charities, but then private companies are also more keen on knowing where their money is going, whether it's spent wisely, whether it's in line with the values of the company, and so on. So there was an opportunity, but also a challenge of making sure that one could adapt the structures of the old-fashioned charity to how companies would do these things.
So not a coincidence that the increased involvement of the private sector has resulted in higher demands for transparency and
right,
reporting.
but other things in the world, of course, right? Together with that, a number of years later, you get 9/11. And then, Homeland Security and all of that, they start to worry seriously about where this money is going, for good reasons. So there was a need for companies to make sure that the money didn't end up somewhere where it shouldn't. And so that's another reason for transparency, caused by events like 9/11. There were issues like Enron and all those scandals. So companies had to make sure that things were transparent and were demanding for that. And at the same time, NGOs like Global Impact, and that's of course the accomplishment of Renee Acosta as the CEO. She understood, she saw these things coming and made a big effort to, first of all, to make Global Impact much more transparent and regularly audited by externals. She changed the board because the board was all people from the charities who were getting the money. She changed that board to only 20% of the people from charities and 80% of the people on the board from government, universities, companies. So, a really competent, broad-looking board. And she made a big effort to make also all the procedures very transparent.
Do you think that 9/11 was a factor in focusing attention outside the U.S., or was it simply a factor in making people worried about the recipients of funds?
I think it was both. 9/11 came as a shock and made the U.S. people realize that they couldn't live, isolated from the rest of the world. And the rest of the world has a big impact also internally in the United States, which was very clear by these attacks.
Coming back to the idea about additional oversight and the demand for transparency, charitable organizations, philanthropic organizations have been around for a while. It's a profession and professionals do it. Is there any tension within these organizations about having people who do not have your professional skill telling you exactly how to do your job?
Well, there can be too much demand for bureaucracy. So and that's again the usefulness of an organization like Global Impact. See, if every company would impose its own transparency documents and procedures on a humanitarian organization, these poor guys would have to deal with 50 different types of forms and management of donors and so on. And that is, of course, bureaucracy. It doesn't necessarily lead to transparency. I do think that, and private companies don't need to interfere with how that money is being spent. They just need to make sure that, say, CARE or Oxfam or Médecins Sans Frontières use the money wisely within their mission, right? And that there's transparency in how that money has been used. And I think that humanitarian organizations today understand that if they want money from the corporate sector, which they know they need, then that transparency comes with it. And it's, the better they can show that they can use the money, well and wisely, the more probability for them to get more funds. So, it's a means to advertise their skills.
Is Global Impact unique in that service that it provides of putting together?
Well, I am not sure it's unique, but it's certainly one of the bigger and better, best case examples, if you want. Because what Global Impact has established itself as a broker, if you want, as an intermediary. So they make sure that they audit the charitable organizations that the money is channeled to. So the companies don't have to worry about that. And there's only one auditing system. So it reduces bureaucracy. At the same time, they also make sure that they take work out of the hands of the companies. For instance, if a big disaster happens and employees of the company want to give money, the only thing the company has to do is put a website number on their intranet, and their intranet will automatically be linked to Global Impact, who will then make sure that the right charity gets the money. And the employee doesn't even see that this is not going through his or her company. And the employee gets from Global Impact, the tax deduction form or whatever for the gift and the recognition for the gift. So the company has no hassle. And so it's this intermediary brokerage system that really works very well and makes sure that there is a good matching, and companies and donors can specify what types of organizations they would like their money to go to. And Global Impact makes sure that that's channeled properly.
This is a service that in some ways replicates what a group like United Way in the States used to do.
That's
but
right.
Are there fundamental changes in the way Global Impact operates then?
Well, Global Impact came from United Way, in fact, because that's how it originated. And that's what we started calling the old-fashioned charity. And this moved into completely different environment where a lot more funds come from corporate donors and companies, and companies, because of 9/11, because of concerns for transparency, because they want to make sure that the donations are in line with their values and so on. Companies want to push, want to work with an organization that they can trust. That's a trusted partner, and they don't have to worry about, checking everything themselves. So I think Global Impact has moved from this old-fashioned to positioning itself as a modern broker that fulfills the role between corporates and workers in corporate organizations and the international now humanitarian organizations, because many of those have now become also global.
You mentioned that the public debate about social responsibility has pushed a lot of these changes, but how concretely does that work in terms of the relationship between a company making a decision to donate, to take philanthropic action, and that sort of diffuse public debate about social responsibility? Where does it actually come together? Is it shareholder pressure? Is it from the marketing people in the company that want to work on the brand image?
It's all of that. It's all of that. I think our society just has, it comes from more media attention for disasters, and therefore, more pressure from the public, something's got to be done. And then our companies make so much money in these countries, and now that there's a disaster in that country, the company should help. Our company should help. So, and then there's also, of course, CEO and management are also concerned about the countries, genuinely concerned about the countries where they operate. So if there is a disaster in a country somewhere, companies, whether it's the workers or the CEO or management, want to do something. And so they will, and that's exactly what Global Impact, that what made them change their business model all the time was this pressure from CEOs after the tsunami saying, we got to do something. Global Impact, do something. And then there was Katrina, and then, and so, and these disasters being different always put different requirements on Global Impact to create some sort of an interface within 24 or 48 hours to make sure that company funds or donations from CEOs or from management could be quickly channeled through Global Impact, almost seamlessly to the humanitarian organizations that could then immediately act on the ground.
We're seeing an extraordinary, as we talk, a very extraordinary interaction between the political life of the United States, the presidential race, and disaster aid. We're seeing political campaigns directly responding to the threat of disaster. Is this something new, the idea that the issues around disaster aid could have such a critical role in the political life of a country?
Difficult question. It is to me, not a good development. There is an increased tendency of governments to link humanitarian help to foreign policy, influence the country. And personally, I don't think, although it's a very naive position, I don't think that you should mix politics with humanitarian work too much. There's a huge risk there, and the risk is security. And Afghanistan and Iraq have shown what happens when military get involved in humanitarian activities and when politics get mixed with that. Security is today the number one issue in the humanitarian world. I think about 200 people have already been killed in Afghanistan, humanitarians, this year. It is because politics and humanitarian and military are starting to be mixed. Very, very tricky. And it poses, humanitarians have to be able to do their work within their humanitarian space of impartiality and neutrality and humanity. Now, companies are not necessarily impartial or neutral, and governments and military cannot be accused of being neutral and impartial. So, they influence the humanitarian space, and sometimes to a point where where these people cannot do their work properly anymore, or there are serious security issues. So I think this is a big danger.
Can an organization like Global Impact do anything to kind of lessen that direct connection between the the political and even the commercial interests of a particular company and the way in which aid is actually delivered?
We describe in the case the transformation, if you want, from old-fashioned philanthropy where they were to now being sort of a flexible broker working largely with the private sector. And the case ends with, is this a sustainable model and what value are they bringing as global impact? And I think one of the things they're doing is advocacy. And I think they have a role to play, or they could play a role in making sure that the corporate world and the political world understand what the concerns of the humanitarians are, and that they can work together, but they should know their place in their space.
Thank you, Luke, for joining us today. Again, the article is Global Impact, Managing Corporate Giving. If you want more information on the INSEAD Social Innovation Center, just go to the website at insead.eu. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.